The fog rolls through the streets of San Francisco like a ghostly veil, wrapping around the towering glass mansion that pierces the skyline like a crystal dagger. Inside, the silence is so thick you could cut it with a knife. The grandfather clock in the corner hasn't moved its hands in months, frozen at 3:47, as if time itself had given up on this place. The leather chair by the window sits empty, yet somehow heavy with the weight of a man's entire existence. I don't know where you're listening from right now. Maybe you're holding a worn photograph of someone you loved, or staring at an empty chair at your kitchen table where laughter used to echo. It doesn't matter what hour it is in your world, but I promise you this. Today's story will reach into the deepest corners of your heart and remind you that miracles still walk among us, often wearing the face of a child. John Everett sits in that leather chair every morning at exactly 6:30, watching the city wake up through bulletproof glass that cost more than most people's homes. His reflection stares back, silver hair perfectly styled, a face that once commanded boardrooms from Wall Street to Silicon Valley, eyes that have seen fortunes rise and fall like ocean tides. The numbers flash on multiple screens around him. Stock prices climbing, cryptocurrency values fluctuating, his net worth approaching figures that would make entire countries envious. Bitcoin wallets holding millions, investment portfolios spreading across 3 continents, real estate assets that could house thousands. Yet John feels poorer than the homeless man he glimpses sleeping under the Golden Gate Bridge through his telescope. His empire spans from tech startups to oil refineries, from pharmaceutical companies to aerospace ventures. Every morning, his phone buzzes with reports from fund managers, alerts about dividend payments, notifications about interest rates and market fluctuations. Money flows through his accounts like rivers converging into an ocean of wealth, but inside his chest, there's nothing but an echoing cavern where his heart used to be. The mansion around him reflects this emptiness. 47 rooms filled with priceless art that no one looks at, a kitchen equipped with chef-grade appliances that prepare meals for one, hallways that stretch like museum corridors where footsteps sound like gunshots in the silence. The temperature is controlled to exactly 72 degrees, the lighting automated to shift throughout the day, mimicking natural rhythms that John's body has forgotten how to follow. He built this fortress after the divorce, after Margaret walked away with nothing but a suitcase and tears in her eyes, saying she couldn't compete with his obsession for control. After little Emma, his 7-year-old daughter, disappeared into the foster care system when Margaret couldn't handle being a single mother, and John couldn't handle being anything but a businessman. The guilt sits in his stomach like a stone, growing heavier each day as he counts his assets and realizes none of them can buy back the sound of his daughter's laughter echoing through these halls. The morning sun struggles to penetrate the fog as John reviews his daily reports, but something unusual catches his peripheral vision. A small figure approaches the mansion's iron gates, moving slowly through the mist like an apparition. At first, he dismisses it, probably another vagrant looking for a handout, or perhaps a journalist trying to sneak photos of the mysterious billionaire who rarely shows his face in public anymore. But there's something different about this figure, something that makes John reach for his telescope. Through the lens, he sees her clearly. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with dark curls escaping from a pink knitted hat that's seen better days. Her jacket is clean but worn, the kind that gets passed down through siblings or bought from thrift stores where every dollar matters. She's carrying a small wicker basket, and even from this distance, John can see the bright splash of color, flowers picked fresh from somewhere in the city's hidden gardens. Amira Nazari walks with the careful steps of a child who has learned that the adult world doesn't always make room for small people with big hearts. She lives 6 blocks away in the Tenderloin district, where the rent eats up most of her mother's paycheck from 2 jobs, cleaning office buildings at night and working as a cashier at a corner market that stays open until midnight. Their apartment is a studio on the 4th floor of a building that creaks in the wind, but Amira has filled it with drawings taped to the walls, origami flowers folded from old newspapers, and the kind of warmth that money can't manufacture. This morning, she overheard something on the crowded bus that made her chest tight with worry. Two men speaking in urgent Arabic about danger, about buildings, about timing. She understood just enough to know that someone needed to be warned, and something in her 8-year-old heart told her that the man in the glass mansion might be the one who could help. When the doorbell chimes through John's mansion, a sound he hasn't heard in months, he actually jumps. His security system shows him the small figure standing at his gate, basket in hand, looking up at the cameras with eyes that seem to hold starlight. The intercom crackles as she speaks, her voice soft but clear as a bell. "Hello, sir. My name is Amira. I brought you flowers, but I also need to tell you something important. About the city. About people who might be in danger." John stares at the screen, this tiny girl who somehow managed to penetrate his fortress of solitude. His first instinct is to press the button that will send her away with a polite automated message. But there's something in her eyes that makes him pause. When was the last time anyone looked at him without wanting something? Money, favors, business deals that would make them rich? When was the last time anyone brought him flowers? Against every instinct screaming in his head, John buzzes open the gate. He watches through multiple security cameras as Amira walks up the curved driveway, her small feet crunching on gravel that costs more per ton than most people spend on groceries in a year. She doesn't gawk at the fountains or the sculpted gardens, doesn't take photos with her phone. She just walks steadily toward the massive oak door with brass fixtures that gleam like gold. When John finally opens that door, they stand there for a moment in complete silence. The billionaire in his $1,000 cashmere sweater and Italian leather shoes, and the little girl in her thrift store jacket and scuffed sneakers holding flowers that probably cost her mother's tip money from the corner market. "I brought these for you," Amira says simply, extending the basket. Inside are dandelions and daisies, baby's breath and a few roses that she must have carefully picked from the public garden near her school. "But I also need to tell you about what I heard. On the bus this morning, there were two men talking, and they sounded scared. Not angry. They were talking about warning people, about something that might happen to tall buildings. I think someone needs to listen to them instead of being afraid of them." John looks down at this child who speaks with the wisdom of someone 3 times her age, who brings gifts instead of asking for them, who wants to warn strangers instead of hiding from danger. For the first time in years, he finds himself at a loss for words. His business acumen, his ability to read people in situations, all of it fails him in the face of pure innocence, standing on his doorstep with wilted flowers and genuine concern for others. But John Everett didn't become one of America's wealthiest men by trusting easily or believing in fairy tales. The skepticism that built his fortune kicks in like armor plating, protecting him from what feels too much like hope. "Little girl," he says, his voice cooling to the temperature he uses in boardrooms when someone wastes his time. "I appreciate your concern, but I don't have time for children's games. If you heard something on the bus, you should tell your parents, not strangers." He steps back from the door, already reaching for the handle to close it, but Amira doesn't move. She simply sets the basket down on his doorstep and looks up at him with those impossibly bright eyes. "My mama says that sometimes God sends messages through the smallest voices," she says quietly. "And sometimes the most important people are too busy listening to big voices that they miss the whispers." Then she turns and walks away, her small figure disappearing into the fog like a dream he's not sure he actually had. John stands in his doorway for a long time after she's gone, staring at the basket of wilted flowers. Part of him wants to throw them in the trash to forget this strange interruption to his carefully controlled morning routine. But something stops him. Maybe it's the sweet scent of the roses mixed with the bitter fog, or maybe it's the memory of another little girl who used to bring him dandelions from the park, calling them sunflowers because they were as bright as summer. He carries the basket inside, and for reasons he can't explain, places it on the marble kitchen counter where it looks completely out of place among the steel appliances and crystal glasses. For the rest of the day, as he reviews quarterly reports and approves multi-million-dollar acquisitions, his eyes keep drifting to those humble flowers. And he finds himself thinking about whispers and whether he's forgotten how to hear them. That night, as San Francisco settles into its familiar rhythm of fog and distant sirens, John dreams of Emma for the first time in months. She's running through the mansion's halls, her laughter bouncing off the walls like music, her small hands leaving fingerprints on his precious art collection. He wakes with tears on his cheeks and the taste of regret sharp in his mouth. The next morning, Amira returns. This time, she doesn't ring the bell. She simply sits on his front steps, a small figure in the morning mist, reading a book with pages that flutter in the ocean breeze. John watches her through his security cameras, fascinated despite himself by her patience, her complete lack of demands or expectations. She's just there. Like a lighthouse beacon, steady and sure, waiting for nothing and offering everything. Day after day she returns. Sometimes she brings flowers, sometimes she brings small drawings tucked into his mailbox, pictures of the Golden Gate Bridge surrounded by hearts or stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. She never asks for anything, never begs for money or food or attention. She simply exists in the periphery of his carefully controlled world, a splash of color against the gray marble of his fortress. John tells himself he's annoying, that he should call security, that he has more important things to worry about than a child's fantasies. His portfolio managers are recommending new investments in emerging markets. His cryptocurrency advisors are pushing him toward innovative blockchain technologies. His real estate team has identified prime development opportunities in 3 major cities. Money flows in and out of his accounts in streams of numbers that would dazzle mathematicians. Yet he finds himself checking the security cameras more often than his stock reports, looking for a small figure with dark curls and an impossibly patient heart. The breakthrough comes on a Thursday morning when the fog is so thick it swallows the city whole. John is reviewing reports from his European fund managers. The euro is fluctuating, interest rates are shifting, dividend payments from his pharmaceutical investments are exceeding projections by 12%. His net worth has increased by $47 million since Monday, but the numbers feel as cold and meaningless as the fog pressing against his windows. That's when he sees her again. But this time, she's not alone. Amira sits on his steps talking to an elderly homeless man, sharing what looks like a sandwich from her school lunch. She's listening intently as he speaks, nodding with the same serious attention she might give a teacher or parent. When he finishes talking, she pats his shoulder gently and hands him something from her pocket. Probably her lunch money, John realizes with a start. Something breaks open in John's chest as he watches this scene unfold. Here's a child who has almost nothing, sharing what little she has with someone who has even less. He thinks about his bank accounts, his investment portfolios worth more than small countries' GDP, his cryptocurrency holdings that could solve homelessness in entire cities. When was the last time he shared anything that wasn't a calculated business decision designed to increase his wealth? When was the last time he gave without expecting returns on his investment? The homeless man shuffles away into the fog, and Amira settles back against his steps as if she has nowhere else to be. That's when John does something he hasn't done in years. He opens his front door and steps outside, letting the cold moisture wrap around him like a baptism. "Why do you keep coming here?" he asks, his voice rougher than he intended. Amira looks up at him without surprise, as if she's been waiting for this moment all along. "Because you look sad," she says simply. "And because my mama taught me that when someone is carrying heavy things, sometimes you just sit with them until the weight feels lighter." John stares down at this small philosopher who sees through his armor as if it's made of glass. "What makes you think I'm sad?" he asks, genuinely curious. "I have everything a person could want. Money, power, success, but not laughter," Amira interrupts gently. "I've been sitting here for weeks and I've never heard laughter coming from your house. My mama says that a house without laughter is just a building, no matter how pretty it is or how much it costs. Her words hit him like a physical blow because she's right. When was the last time there was genuine joy inside these walls? John finds himself sitting down on his own front steps, something he's never done since moving into this mansion. The marble is cold through his expensive pants, but there's something grounding about it, something real in a life that's become nothing but abstractions and numbers. Amira doesn't seem surprised by this development. She simply scoots over to make room for him, as natural as breathing. They sit in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fog swirl around the city like a living thing. Finally, John speaks. "Tell me about what you heard on the bus, the real reason you came here." Amira's expression grows serious, and she explains in her clear, careful voice about the two men, their worried faces, their urgent discussion about warnings that needed to be heard rather than feared. As she talks, John realizes that his business instincts are already kicking in, analyzing the information, considering the implications, planning responses. But underneath all that, something else is stirring, a feeling he'd almost forgotten existed, the desire to protect, to help, to be part of something larger than his own accumulation of wealth. Over the following weeks, something extraordinary begins to happen in John's fortress of solitude. The changes are subtle at first. He finds himself brewing 2 cups of coffee in the morning instead of 1, setting the second cup by the window where Amira can see it when she arrives for their unspoken morning meetings. He starts leaving the intercom open so he can hear her voice when she greets the homeless people who sometimes gather near his gates, sharing her school lunch and listening to their stories with the same attention she gives him. The mansion itself seems to respond to her presence. Rooms that have been closed off for years suddenly feel less oppressive when she's nearby. And John catches himself opening curtains he's kept drawn for months, letting natural light compete with the artificial illumination that's controlled his days. Amira never asks about his wealth directly, but she notices things, the way his watch catches light and realizes it must cost more than her mother makes in a year, the way his shoes are made of leather so fine it looks like silk, the way even his casual clothes carry the subtle signs of expense that money can't hide. Yet she treats him exactly the same as she treats the homeless man she shares sandwiches with, the bus driver who always waves when she boards, the elderly woman who runs the corner market where her mother works. To Amira, kindness isn't rationed based on bank accounts, and compassion isn't a commodity to be bought and sold. This revelation astonishes John more than any market analysis or profit report ever has. He spent so many years in a world where everything has a price that he's forgotten there are people who give freely without calculating the return on investment. The first real breakthrough comes when Amira mentions her mother, Yasmin, who works 2 jobs to keep their small apartment and still finds energy to help their neighbors when emergencies arise. John learns that Yasmin cleans his own office building downtown, working through the night while he sleeps in his climate-controlled bedroom, scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans to support her daughter's education. The irony isn't lost on him. While he's been sitting in his mansion counting his billions, the mother of the child who's slowly healing his heart has been maintaining the very spaces where his wealth is generated. He thinks about offering to help, to write a check that would change their lives forever, but something in Amira's quiet dignity stops him. She's not here for his money. She's here for something far more valuable and infinitely rarer. She's here offering the gift of genuine human connection, expecting nothing in return but the honor of being heard. As autumn paints San Francisco in shades of gold and crimson, John finds himself looking forward to Amira's visits with an anticipation he hasn't felt since childhood Christmas mornings. She brings him drawings now, not the typical stick figures most children create, but remarkably detailed sketches of the city she loves, complete with the homeless camps under freeway overpasses, the community gardens where immigrants grow vegetables that remind them of home, the playgrounds where children from 12 different countries play games in languages that sound like music. Through her art, John sees San Francisco as he never has before, not as a collection of investment opportunities and market demographics, but as a living tapestry of human stories. each thread as valuable as any stock certificate or cryptocurrency wallet. Her drawings find their way onto his refrigerator, then his office walls, bringing color and life into spaces that have been sterile and cold for too long. One foggy evening, as the city lights blur into impressionist paintings beyond his windows, Amira arrives with something different in her expression, a weight that seems too heavy for such small shoulders to carry. She sits on his steps as usual, but her usual bright chatter is replaced by thoughtful silence. When John joins her, she looks up with eyes that seem older than her years. "Mr. John," she says quietly, "do you think people can change? Really change? Not just pretend to be different?" The question catches him off guard with its directness and depth. He realizes she's not asking theoretically. She's asking about him, about whether the walls he's built around his heart can actually come down, whether the man who chose money over family can learn to choose love over control. His first instinct is to give her a safe adult answer that doesn't reveal too much vulnerability. But something in her trusting gaze demands honesty. "I don't know," John admits, his voice barely audible above the city's nighttime symphony. "I've been one way for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to be different. I've made choices, lost people, hurt the ones I loved most because I thought success meant having more than everyone else." Amira nods as if his confession makes perfect sense to her 8-year-old wisdom. "My mama says that hearts are like flowers," she says, reaching into her jacket pocket to pull out a small wilted rose. "Even when they look dead, sometimes all they need is water and sunlight and patience, and someone who believes they can bloom again." She presses the rose into his hand, and John feels something crack open in his chest, not breaking, but opening, like a door that's been locked for years, finally remembering how to turn its handle. That night, for the first time since the divorce, John calls his lawyer, not to discuss mergers or acquisitions, but to ask about Emma, his daughter who disappeared into the foster care system. The conversation is painful and hopeful in equal measure. Emma is 15 now, living with a kind family in Sacramento, doing well in school, playing violin in the youth orchestra. She's grown up without him, learned to laugh and dream and trust without his presence, and John realizes this might be the greatest gift he never knew he gave her, the freedom to become herself without his obsession with control shaping her choices. The lawyer agrees to reach out to see if Emma might be willing to exchange letters, to slowly rebuild a bridge across the chasm that John's choices created. As he hangs up the phone, John looks at Amira's withered rose, now sitting in a crystal glass on his kitchen counter, and wonders if hope really can bloom in the most unlikely places. The seasons change, and so does the mansion. John hires a team to remove the bulletproof glass from his windows, replacing it with regular windows that can actually open, that let in the sounds and scents of the living city beyond. He donates the security equipment to a women's shelter, keeping only basic safety measures that don't make his home feel like a prison. The frozen clock is repaired, its hands once again marking the passage of time with gentle persistence. For the first time in years, John can hear birds singing in the morning, can smell the salt air from the bay, can feel natural breezes moving through rooms that have been climate-controlled for too long. Amira notices these changes without commenting directly, but her smiles grow brighter, and she starts bringing friends, other children from her neighborhood who are curious about the mysterious mansion and the man who's slowly learning to live in it rather than hiding from the world. But transformation is rarely a straight line, and John's journey toward healing faces its greatest test when his business rival, Marcus Webb, begins spreading rumors that John has lost his edge, that his mysterious friendship with a child from the Tenderloin has made him soft and unreliable. Stock prices for John's companies fluctuate as investors worry about his mental stability, his commitment to profit maximization, his ability to make the hard decisions that have built his empire. The pressure mounts when his own board of directors calls an emergency meeting, questioning his recent charitable donations, his decision to increase wages for service workers in his buildings, his apparent shift from pure capitalism to what they see as naive philanthropy. The message is clear. Return to the ruthless businessman they remember, or face the possibility of losing control of the companies he spent his life building. The crisis comes to a head on a rain-soaked Thursday when the financial press publishes a scathing article titled "The Billionaire and the Little Girl." Has John Everett lost his mind? The piece dissects his recent changes in behavior, his uncharacteristic charitable activities, his apparent obsession with an immigrant child whose family doesn't even contribute to his tax bracket's economic interests. The article includes photos taken with telephoto lenses showing Amira sitting on his steps, creating a narrative that portrays him as either mentally unstable or being manipulated by a sophisticated con game involving an innocent-looking child as bait. By noon, his stock portfolio has lost $200 million in value, and his phone is ringing with concerned calls from investors, partners, and colleagues who've built their own fortunes by association with his success. John sits in his office, surrounded by screens showing red numbers and declining graphs, feeling the familiar weight of financial pressure that has driven his decisions for decades. His advisors are unanimous in their recommendation: distance himself from the girl and her family, make a public statement about returning his focus to business, perhaps even relocate to another city where he can rebuild his reputation without the distraction of relationships that don't generate profit. The old John, the man who chose money over marriage, success over family, control over love, would follow this advice without hesitation. But as he stares at the latest financial reports, his eyes drift to Amira's latest drawing taped to his wall, a picture of two stick figures sitting on steps together, surrounded by flowers and birds and a sun that fills half the page with golden rays. That afternoon, instead of calling a press conference to distance himself from Amira, John does something that shocks the financial world. He calls a different kind of press conference, one where he stands behind a podium, not to discuss quarterly earnings or market strategies, but to tell the story of a little girl who saw danger and tried to warn others, who brought flowers to a stranger and asked for nothing in return, who listened to the fears and pain of a broken man and offered the healing power of unconditional acceptance. He speaks about the refugees Amira had overheard on the bus, not terrorists planning attacks, but families desperate to share information about injustices they'd witnessed, looking for someone with the power and platform to amplify voices that had been silenced by fear and misunderstanding. He announces the establishment of the Amira Foundation, funded with $500 million of his own wealth, dedicated to building bridges between communities that have been divided by prejudice and economic inequality. The financial press calls it career suicide, but something unexpected happens. Other voices begin to emerge, people who are hungry for stories of genuine transformation, who are tired of a world where everything is measured in profit margins and market share. Letters pour in from parents who see their own children's capacity for wisdom and compassion reflected in Amira's story, from grandparents who remember when neighborhoods were communities rather than economic demographics, from people who have built successful lives but feel empty inside, who recognize their own fortress-like existence in John's journey from isolation to connection. The stock prices eventually stabilize, then begin to climb as investors realize that John's transformation has created new opportunities in socially responsible investing, in companies that measure success not just in dollars earned, but in lives improved and communities strengthened. But the greatest test is yet to come. One morning, as autumn turns toward winter and the fog carries the bite of approaching storms, Amira doesn't appear on John's steps. He waits past their usual meeting time, checking his security cameras and growing increasingly concerned. When she doesn't arrive the second day, he does something unprecedented. He leaves his mansion to look for her, walking the 6 blocks to the Tenderloin district where she lives. The contrast is stark. From his manicured streets with their pristine sidewalks and designer storefronts to neighborhoods where hope and despair exist side by side, where families work multiple jobs to afford single rooms, where children play in parking lots because parks are too far away or too dangerous. John finds their apartment building after asking directions from 3 different people, each of whom looks at his expensive clothes with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. Yasmin answers the door looking exhausted and worried, her eyes red from crying and lack of sleep. When she sees John, her expression shifts to something complicated, gratitude mixed with embarrassment, hope tangled with the kind of pride that comes from years of making do with very little. Amira is sick, she explains in accented English that carries the musical quality of her native language. Very sick. The doctors say pneumonia, but the hospital bill... She doesn't finish the sentence, but John understands. Even with insurance from her 2 jobs, even with government assistance programs, the cost of serious medical care can destroy a family's financial stability overnight. Amira lies in a small bed pushed against the window, her usually bright eyes dimmed by fever, her breath coming in shallow, rapid gasps that seem too fragile for someone who has carried so much wisdom in such a small body. John looks at this child who has given him everything: hope, purpose, the courage to reconnect with his own lost daughter, the strength to choose love over control, and realizes that all his wealth means nothing if he can't use it to protect the people who matter most. He makes phone calls that mobilize resources most people can only dream of. Private medical transportation to the best children's hospital in the state, a team of specialists who normally treat the children of celebrities and foreign dignitaries, a private room with every comfort that money can buy. But more than that, he stays with them. This man who hasn't sat in a hospital waiting room since his own mother died 20 years ago, holding Yasmin's hand and telling her over and over that everything will be all right, that Amira will recover, that he'll take care of everything she needs. For 3 days and nights, John maintains his vigil, refusing to leave even when his business partners call with emergencies, even when stock prices fluctuate because of his absence from important meetings, even when the press speculates about his latest breakdown or publicity stunt. He sleeps in an uncomfortable hospital chair, eats vending machine food, and discovers muscles he'd forgotten he had, as stress and worry knot his shoulders into painful tangles. Yasmin shares stories about Amira's childhood, about the wisdom that seemed to pour out of her even as a toddler, about the way she's always been drawn to people who are hurting, as if she has some internal radar for pain and an unstoppable compulsion to try to heal it. John realizes that he's not the only person Amira has transformed. Her school teachers speak of her with reverence, her neighbors light up when they mention her name. Even the homeless people in the park know her as the little girl who brings sandwiches and listens to stories that no one else wants to hear. On the 3rd night, as John dozes fitfully in his chair beside Amira's bed, she wakes up and looks at him with eyes that are still weak but clearer than they've been in days. "Mr. John," she whispers, her voice barely audible above the quiet hum of medical equipment. "You stayed." It's not a question, but a statement of a wonder, as if she's surprised that someone like him would choose to be present during someone else's crisis rather than managing it from a distance. "Of course I stayed," John replies, his voice rough with emotion he's stopped trying to hide. "You taught me that the most important things in life aren't the ones you can buy or sell or invest in. They're the ones you show up for, even when it's inconvenient or expensive or doesn't make logical sense." Amira smiles, that radiant expression that seems to create light rather than simply reflecting it, and John feels the last of his old self's armor finally, completely fall away. The miracle that follows isn't the kind that makes headlines or requires medical explanation. It's the quiet miracle of recovery aided by excellent care, of strength returning to a small body day by day, of laughter gradually replacing the sound of labored breathing. But there's another miracle too, the way John's presence in the hospital changes the atmosphere of the entire pediatric wing. His foundation begins funding play therapy programs, ensuring that every child has access to books and art supplies and musical instruments that can provide comfort during long treatments. He establishes relationships with the medical staff, learning their names and their stories, discovering that healing happens not just through medicine, but through human connection, through the knowledge that someone cares enough to stay present during the longest, darkest hours. When Amira is finally released from the hospital, she's thinner than before and still prone to tiring easily, but her spirit shines as brightly as ever. The ride back to her neighborhood takes them through the heart of San Francisco, past the financial district where John's empire continues to generate wealth, past the tourist areas where visitors flock to see famous landmarks, through the diverse neighborhoods where people from dozens of countries have built new lives with nothing but hope and determination. As they drive, John realizes that he's seeing his city with completely different eyes, not as a collection of investment opportunities or demographic statistics, but as a living community where every person has a story, a dream, a capacity for both giving and receiving love. The homecoming becomes a spontaneous block party as neighbors emerge from apartments and shops to welcome Amira back. Someone brings a guitar, someone else appears with homemade cookies. Children who had been worried about their friend gather around to share games and stories, and the kind of pure joy that adults often forget how to experience. John finds himself in the middle of it all. This billionaire, who once hidden behind bulletproof glass, now sitting on a fire escape eating tamales, prepared by a grandmother who speaks no English, but communicates perfectly through smiles and gestures of hospitality. For the first time in his adult life, he's part of a community that isn't defined by profit margins or stock portfolios, where his worth isn't measured by his net worth, but by his willingness to be present, to contribute, to care. As winter settles over San Francisco and the year moves toward its close, John's transformation accelerates in ways that surprise even him. His mansion, once a fortress, becomes a gathering place for the most unlikely group of people. Amira's friends from the neighborhood, their parents who initially viewed him with suspicion, but gradually accept his genuine desire to help and connect. His own business associates who find themselves drawn into conversations about purpose and meaning rather than just profit and loss. The house fills with sounds it hasn't heard in years. Children's laughter echoing through the halls, multiple languages blending in dinner table conversations, music from guitars and violins and voices raised in songs that carry the flavors of their singers' homelands. The greatest miracle of all comes in the form of a letter with a Sacramento postmark, written in handwriting that John recognizes despite the years that have passed since he last saw it. Emma, his daughter, now 15 and mature beyond her years, has agreed to correspond with him. Her first letter is cautious but not cold, curious but not accusatory. She writes about her life, her interests in environmental science and social justice, her plans for college, her hope to work for organizations that fight climate change and economic inequality. Reading her words, John realizes that she's become exactly the kind of person he always hoped she would be. Strong, compassionate, intelligent, committed to making the world better rather than just making herself richer. The irony isn't lost on him. By losing his chance to control her development, he allowed her to develop into someone far more remarkable than he could have shaped her to be. Their correspondence grows into phone calls, and phone calls grow into tentative plans for visits. Emma wants to meet Amira, the girl whose story has become part of her father's transformation. She's curious about the foundation, about the community programs, about the man her father has become in the years since they've been apart. There's forgiveness in her willingness to rebuild their relationship, but there's also a clear message. She's not interested in a father who sees relationships as transactions or love as something that can be bought with expensive gifts and extravagant gestures. She wants authenticity, consistency, the kind of presence that John has learned to offer Amira and her community. As spring returns to San Francisco, bringing with it the hope of new beginnings, John realizes that the numbers on his financial statements have become secondary to the richness of his daily life. Yes, his companies continue to prosper. His investments continue to generate impressive returns. His cryptocurrency holdings have weathered market volatility with the kind of resilience that comes from diversification and patience. But these successes feel different now. They're tools for creating positive change rather than just for accumulating more wealth, resources that can fund programs and opportunities rather than just sitting idle in accounts, growing for the sake of growth itself. The Amira Foundation has become his primary focus, funding not just charitable programs, but also business ventures that generate both profit and social benefit. He invests in companies that hire refugees and provide job training, in affordable housing developments that don't sacrifice dignity for cost savings, in educational programs that recognize the wisdom and potential that exist in every community, regardless of income level or immigration status. His approach to business hasn't become less profitable. If anything, it's become more successful because it's more sustainable, more connected to real human needs rather than artificial market demands. But the most important transformation isn't measured in dollars or programs or press coverage. It's measured in the quality of John's days, in his ability to sleep peacefully without medication, in the genuine smiles that now come easily to his face, in the way he looks forward to mornings instead of dreading them. He wakes up excited to see what Amira will bring him, not in terms of gifts or insights, but in terms of the simple pleasure of spending time with someone who sees the world with wonder and approaches it with love. Her mother, Yasmin, has become like family to him, sharing meals and stories and the kind of comfortable silence that comes between people who have been through difficulties together and emerged stronger. The mansion itself reflects these changes. Rooms that were once sterile showpieces have become lived-in spaces full of books and art and comfortable furniture that invites relaxation rather than intimidation. The kitchen, once used only by hired staff to prepare solitary meals, now hosts cooking lessons where Yasmin teaches John to prepare foods from her homeland while he shares techniques he learned from his own grandmother decades ago. The gardens, once maintained by professional landscapers according to strict aesthetic principles, now include vegetable plots and flower beds that neighborhood children help tend, learning about growth and patience and the reward of nurturing something over time. 1 year after Amira first appeared on his doorstep with her basket of wilted flowers, John throws a party. Not the kind of networking event that used to fill his social calendar, but a genuine celebration of community and friendship. The guest list reads like a cross-section of San Francisco itself. Business leaders and homeless advocates, recent immigrants and long-time residents, children and grandparents, people who speak a dozen different languages, but who all understand the universal language of shared humanity. As he looks around his transformed home, filled with laughter and music and the kind of joy that money can't manufacture, John realizes that he's found something he didn't even know he was looking for, a sense of belonging that transcends bank balances and stock portfolios. Amira moves through the party like a small ambassador of happiness, introducing people to each other, making sure the elderly guests have comfortable places to sit, helping in the kitchen with the natural competence of someone who has been taking care of others her entire life. When she catches John's eye across the crowded room, she gives him a smile that seems to say, "See, I told you hearts could bloom again." And John smiles back, this man who once counted his worth in billions, but now measures his wealth in the depth of his connections and the quality of his days, knowing that he's finally learned the difference between having everything and having enough. Emma arrives for her first visit on a foggy Saturday morning in late spring, stepping out of the taxi with the cautious posture of someone who hopes for the best but is prepared for disappointment. She's beautiful in the way that 15-year-old girls can be, all potential and possibility, with John's eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. The reunion is awkward at first, both of them uncertain how to navigate the space between the strangers they've become and the family they used to be. But Amira becomes the bridge, treating Emma like the sister she's never had, showing her the drawings and photos that cover John's refrigerator, sharing stories about their daily adventures, and the community that has grown up around the unlikely friendship between a billionaire and a little girl from the Tenderloin. As the days pass, John and Emma begin to find their rhythm as father and daughter, not picking up where they left off, but starting fresh, building something new on the foundation of who they've both become during their years apart. Emma is impressed by the foundation's work, by the genuine warmth of the community that now surrounds her father, by the obvious love and respect that exists between John and Amira's family. She sees in John not the cold, controlling businessman she remembered, but a man who has learned to listen more than he speaks, to ask questions rather than giving orders, to measure success in smiles and relationships rather than just profit margins and market dominance. On Emma's last night of the visit, the three of them, John, Emma, and Amira, sit on the front steps of the mansion where this journey began, watching the fog roll in from the Pacific Ocean like nature's own daily miracle. The conversation flows easily between past and present, dreams and memories, plans for the future that include regular visits, shared adventures, and the kind of ongoing connection that families create when they choose love over pride, forgiveness over resentment, presence over perfection. As the city settles into its evening rhythm around them, John realizes that he's experiencing something he thought he'd lost forever: the contentment that comes from being exactly where you belong with exactly the people who matter most. Years pass. The foundation grows and thrives, funding programs that help immigrants integrate into their new communities, that provide educational opportunities for children who might otherwise be overlooked, that create bridges between economic and cultural groups that might otherwise remain separate and suspicious of each other. John's business empire continues to prosper, but it operates differently now, with attention to worker welfare, environmental impact, and social responsibility woven into every decision. His personal wealth continues to grow, but it flows out as quickly as it comes in, directed toward programs and people and possibilities that create long-term positive change rather than short-term impressive profits. Amira grows into adolescence with the same wisdom and compassion that marked her childhood, becoming a leader in her school and community, pursuing studies that will prepare her for a career in social work or international relations, or some other field where her natural empathy and cultural bridging abilities can make the biggest difference. She never loses her special connection to John, but their relationship evolves as they both change, becoming less about her healing his wounds and more about their mutual commitment to healing the wounds in their broader community. Emma finishes high school and chooses to attend UC Berkeley, where she studies environmental science and spends her summer breaks working with the foundation on projects that address climate change's disproportionate impact on low-income communities. The relationship between father and daughter continues to strengthen, built now on mutual respect and shared values rather than just biological connection. She brings friends home for holidays, filling the mansion with young people who see John not as an intimidating billionaire, but as Emma's dad who cooks surprisingly good homemade pasta and who listens to their concerns about the future with the same attention he once gave to quarterly earnings reports. On a foggy morning 5 years after Amira first appeared with her basket of flowers, John sits in his same leather chair by the window, but everything else has changed. The chair faces a window that's usually open, letting in the sounds and scents of a living city. The frozen clock has been replaced with one that keeps perfect time, marking moments that actually matter rather than just passing emptiness. The silence has been replaced with the comfortable sounds of a home where people live and laugh and love each other. Yasmin humming while she prepares breakfast in the kitchen, Amira practicing piano in the music room that used to be his sterile office, Emma discussing her latest environmental justice project on the phone with classmates who have become close family friends. The morning reports on his phone still show impressive numbers: stock prices, investment returns, cryptocurrency values that would make financial headlines if anyone knew the full scope of his holdings. But John barely glances at them now, more interested in the text messages from Foundation staff about a successful after-school program launch, from Emma about her latest research project, from Amira about the community garden that's being established in the vacant lot next to her apartment building. His wealth continues to grow, but it has become a tool for creating opportunities rather than an end in itself, a means of ensuring that other people can experience the kind of transformation and hope that Amira brought into his life. As John sits in his chair, sipping coffee that Yasmin taught him to prepare with cardamom and watching the fog lift to reveal another beautiful day in San Francisco, he reflects on the journey that brought him from isolation to connection, from emptiness to purpose, from counting dollars to counting blessings. The numbers in his bank accounts are still impressive: billions of dollars in assets, investment portfolios that span multiple continents, cryptocurrency holdings that have weathered every market fluctuation. But the numbers that matter most to him now are different. The number of children who have found educational opportunities through the foundation, the number of families who have found stable housing through his development projects, the number of refugees who have found their voices and their place in American communities through the programs that Amira's initial warning helped inspire. The sound of laughter drifts up from the kitchen, where Amira is teaching Emma how to fold origami flowers, while Yasmin tells stories about her own childhood in a faraway country that now feels perfectly integrated into this American family they've all chosen to create together. John realizes that this is what wealth really means: not the accumulation of money, but the ability to create space and opportunity for love to flourish, for community to form, for healing to happen not just in individual hearts, but in the broader world that benefits when people choose connection over isolation, generosity over greed, presence over power. And you, listening to this story wherever you are in your own journey, have you ever met someone small who changed your life in immense ways? Have you discovered that the most important investments aren't measured in dollars and cents, but in moments and memories, relationships and redemption? Maybe you're sitting in your own leather chair, looking out at your own city, wondering if it's too late to open windows that have been closed too long, to repair relationships that seemed broken beyond fixing, to find purpose that transcends profit and meaning that outlasts market fluctuations. The truth that Amira brought to John's doorstep with her wilted flowers is the same truth available to each of us every morning when we wake up and choose how to spend our most precious resources: our time, our attention, our capacity for love. We can build fortresses that protect us from pain but also isolate us from joy. Or we can open our doors to the unexpected messengers who arrive with empty hands and full hearts, ready to remind us that the most valuable things in life are the ones that can't be bought or sold, only given and received with the kind of grace that transforms billionaires and paupers alike. What none of them could have predicted is how this story would ripple outward, traveling far beyond the fog-wrapped hills of San Francisco to touch hearts in unexpected corners of the world. The press conference where John announced the Amira Foundation sparked something unprecedented, not the cynical media cycle that usually accompanies billionaire philanthropy, but genuine grassroots movement of ordinary people inspired by the simple idea that children often carry wisdom that adults have forgotten how to hear. Letters began arriving by the thousands, not asking for money, but sharing stories of their own small teachers, their own moments of revelation, delivered by voices too young to vote, but old enough to understand what really matters. In Mumbai, a tech executive named Raj reads about John and Amira while rushing between meetings that determine the fates of thousands of employees, but never leave time for coffee with his own 7-year-old daughter. He closes his laptop in the middle of a quarterly review and goes home early for the first time in months, finding his child in their apartment courtyard, teaching origami to the children of the building's maintenance staff. She shows him how to fold paper cranes with the same patience John learned from watching Amira, and Raj realizes that his daughter has been trying to teach him about presents for years, but he's been too busy optimizing profit margins to notice. In Lagos, Nigeria, an oil executive named Chinelo has spent 15 years building an empire that rivals anything John accomplished, but she lives alone in a compound that might as well be on another planet from her childhood neighborhood where her grandmother still makes soup for anyone who arrives hungry at her doorstep. When she reads about John's transformation, something breaks open in her chest that she'd sealed off when she decided that wealth meant more than wisdom. She drives through the dusty streets to see her grandmother, who looks up from stirring a massive pot and says simply, "I wondered when you would remember who you used to be." The old woman doesn't ask about Chinelo's bank accounts or business ventures. She just hands her a wooden spoon and puts her to work feeding people whose names don't appear on any Forbes list, but whose stories could fill libraries. In São Paulo, Brazil, a real estate mogul named Carlos has turned neighborhood after neighborhood into luxury developments that price out the families who built communities there over generations. But his 12-year-old nephew, Miguel, keeps asking uncomfortable questions about where the children who used to play in those streets have gone, why the elderly people who ran corner shops for decades suddenly can't afford to live in places they called home for 50 years. When Carlos reads John's story, he sees his nephew's questions through different eyes, not as innocent curiosity, but as moral challenges that have been waiting for adult courage to meet them. He starts including affordable housing in his developments, not because it's profitable, but because Miguel's questions remind him that profit without purpose is just accumulation without satisfaction. These ripple effects multiply across continents, creating a network of transformation that none of them planned, but all of them needed. Social media platforms that usually amplify division and anger become conduits for stories of reconciliation and bridge building. The hashtag #BigSmallVoicesBigWisdom begins trending not because of celebrity endorsements or marketing campaigns, but because parents around the world start sharing videos of their children's insights, their questions that cut through adult complexities to reach simple truths, their capacity to see solutions that seem impossible to grown-ups who have forgotten how to imagine better worlds. In Tokyo, a pharmaceutical CEO named Akiko watches her 4-year-old son give his favorite toy to a crying child on the subway, then explain to her later that, when someone is sad, sharing makes the sadness smaller for both people. She realizes that her company's pricing strategies, designed to maximize shareholder returns, have been making sadness bigger for millions of people who can't afford medications that could improve or save their lives. The next board meeting becomes the scene of the most important presentation of her career, not about market penetration or competitive advantages, but about the moral imperative to balance profit with accessibility. To remember that behind every prescription is a human being whose worth can't be measured in units sold or revenue generated. Back in San Francisco, John receives a phone call that changes everything yet again. The caller is Dr. Sarah Chen, a researcher at UCSF, who has been studying the neurological impact of intergenerational trauma on refugee children. She explains that through her work with Amira's community, she's discovered something remarkable. Children who maintain strong connections to elders who listen to their perspectives without judgment show measurably different brain development patterns, enhanced capacity for empathy and problem solving, increased resilience in the face of stress and uncertainty. The scientific validation of what John and Amira have experienced intuitively becomes the foundation for expanding the Foundation's work into neuroscience research, exploring how the simple act of adults taking children seriously can literally reshape the developing brain in ways that promote lifelong emotional and intellectual health. This research attracts the attention of educators worldwide, leading to pilot programs in schools from Helsinki to Nairobi, where curriculum design starts with the question, what do our students already know that we haven't learned to hear yet? Traditional teaching models that position adults as experts, dispensing knowledge to passive recipients, give way to collaborative learning environments where children's questions drive investigation, where their insights into fairness and justice inform school policies, where their natural capacity for wonder becomes the starting point for scientific inquiry and artistic expression. Amira, now 13 and more thoughtful than ever, finds herself accidentally at the center of this global movement. Universities invite her to speak at conferences about childhood development and social innovation, but she insists on bringing her friends from the Tenderloin, pointing out that wisdom isn't any single person's property, but emerges from communities where different perspectives can meet and learn from each other. Her keynote speeches become group conversations, panels where children from diverse backgrounds share their observations about the world they're inheriting and their ideas for making it more just, more sustainable, more joyful for everyone, rather than just for those born into privilege. John realizes that his role in this expanding story has shifted again. No longer just the reformed billionaire learning to reconnect with his humanity, he becomes something like a facilitator, using his resources and connections to amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard, to fund research that might otherwise lack support, to create platforms where unusual conversations can happen between people who might never otherwise meet. His wealth becomes less important than his willingness to use it in service of ideas bigger than any individual's accumulation of power or possessions. The Amira Foundation evolves into something unprecedented in the philanthropy world, an organization that funds its own eventual obsolescence, working to create systems where the wisdom and perspectives of all people, regardless of age or economic status, are valued and integrated into decision-making processes. Instead of perpetuating dependency on charitable giving, the foundation invests in changing the structures that create inequality in the first place, supporting political candidates who listen to children's climate concerns, funding legal challenges to policies that prioritize corporate profits over human well-being, creating educational programs that teach adults how to collaborate with, rather than just care for the young people in their communities. Emma, now in her third year at Berkeley, brings her environmental science background to bear on the Foundation's work, developing programs that address the climate crisis through the lens of intergenerational justice. She partners with indigenous communities whose children have grown up understanding concepts like seven-generation thinking, where every decision is evaluated based on its impact on children who won't be born for decades. Her research demonstrates that societies which systematically include young people's perspectives in environmental policy making show measurably better outcomes in carbon reduction, biodiversity preservation, and sustainable resource management. The financial results of all this transformation continue to astound John's former business associates. Companies that operate with attention to stakeholder welfare, rather than just shareholder returns, show greater long-term profitability, more resilient supply chains, higher employee retention, and stronger market positions than competitors focus purely on quarterly gains. The investment strategies that incorporate Amira's foundation values consistently outperform traditional approaches, not because virtue is its own reward, but because business models based on genuine human needs rather than manufactured desires create more stable and sustainable value over time. John's personal life becomes a reflection of these broader changes. His mansion, once a fortress of isolation, now serves as an informal community center where refugee families practice English conversation with volunteer tutors, where Amira and her friends conduct science experiments in the state-of-the-art kitchen, where Emma's university classmates gather to study environmental policy, while Yasmin prepares meals that blend flavors from Afghanistan, Italy, Mexico, and California into combinations that somehow represent the complexity and richness of their chosen family. The evening conversations in this transformed space cover topics that would have seemed impossible in John's former life. How can artificial intelligence be developed to serve human flourishing rather than just economic efficiency? What would banking systems look like if they were designed by people who had experienced poverty rather than just those who study it from academic distance? How might urban planning change if city councils included the perspectives of children who actually play in neighborhoods rather than just adults who view those spaces as economic units to be optimized? These aren't theoretical discussions, but planning sessions for actual projects. John's financial network provides access to decision-makers who can implement innovative policies, while Amira's community connections ensure that those policies address real needs rather than abstract problems. Emma's generational perspective brings urgency to long-term planning, while Yasmin's experience navigating systems designed to exclude immigrants provides insight into making institutions more accessible and responsive to diverse populations. But perhaps the most profound change is in John himself, in the quality of his daily experience now that his life is aligned with values deeper than accumulation. He sleeps peacefully, without the pharmaceutical assistance that used to be necessary when his days were filled with strategic planning designed to outmaneuver competitors and maximize market advantages. His health has improved dramatically since his stress shifted from chronic anxiety about protecting what he owns to energizing excitement about creating what the world needs. His relationship with money has matured from obsession to utility, from hoarding to investment in outcomes that compound benefits for communities rather than just individuals. The media attention that once focused on John's financial success now highlights the innovative projects emerging from collaborations between his foundation and communities around the world. Feature articles profile the refugee women in Amira's neighborhood who have started a catering business that now serves corporate events throughout Silicon Valley, bringing Afghan and Palestinian and Somali flavors to tech workers who had never tasted food that carried stories of resilience and hope across continents of displacement and adaptation. Documentary film crews capture the transformation of entire neighborhoods where the Foundation's community listening projects have led to resident-directed development rather than gentrification that displaces people who have lived in areas for generations. Instead of luxury condos that require multiple six-figure salaries to afford, these neighborhoods feature mixed-income housing where families can stay in communities where they have roots, where children can attend the same schools as their parents did, where elderly people can age in place rather than being priced out by developers who see land values rather than human relationships. International development organizations study the Foundation's model for approaches that support communities in defining their own priorities rather than implementing solutions designed by outsiders who may not understand local contexts or existing strengths. Traditional charity models that position recipients as grateful beneficiaries of donor generosity give way to partnership approaches that recognize the expertise that comes from lived experience, the innovations that emerge when people have resources to implement their own creative solutions rather than depending on programs designed by others. John's former business rivals, many of whom initially dismissive his transformation as a publicity stunt or midlife crisis, begin quietly reaching out to learn about strategies that have led to both meaningful social impact and impressive financial returns. Behind-the-scenes conversations in boardrooms and private clubs increasingly focus not on whether conscious capitalism is profitable, but on how to implement it effectively, how to measure success in ways that include impact on communities and employees rather than just returns to shareholders. The cryptocurrency investments that John made years earlier become the foundation for innovative financial instruments that democratize access to capital for community-led development projects. Blockchain technology, often associated with speculation and get-rich-quick schemes, becomes a tool for transparent tracking of how investment dollars create measurable improvements in education, healthcare, environmental protection, and economic opportunity for people whose needs are often invisible to traditional financial markets. As Amira approaches her 15th birthday, she embodies a kind of leadership that represents something entirely new in John's experience: power that grows by being shared rather than hoarded, influence that comes from listening rather than commanding, authority that derives from service rather than control. She speaks at conferences and community meetings with the same genuine presence, whether her audience consists of Nobel laureates or neighborhood teenagers, whether she's addressing venture capitalists or volunteer coordinators, whether she's explaining complex social dynamics to policymakers or simple principles of kindness to children who are just learning how to navigate playground relationships. Emma, now preparing for graduate school in environmental policy, brings her friends home for holidays and study sessions that transform John's mansion into an informal think tank where the next generation of leaders work on solutions to problems their parents' generation created but couldn't solve. These young people approach challenges like climate change, economic inequality, and political polarization with tools that weren't available to previous generations: global communication networks that can coordinate action across continents, scientific understanding that reveals connections between environmental and social systems, and most importantly, freedom from assumptions about what's impossible that have limited their elders' imagination. The Foundation's research initiatives now span multiple universities and research institutions, studying questions that emerge from practitioner experience rather than academic theory. How do communities that successfully integrate refugee populations differ from those that experience conflict and resentment? What are the measurable impacts on children's development when schools include their voices in curriculum design and policy making? How do businesses that prioritize employee well-being perform compared to those focused purely on cost-cutting and profit maximization? John, reviewing these research reports in his morning routine, realizes that the questions driving academic investigation have completely changed since Amira first appeared on his doorstep. Instead of studies designed to help wealthy people accumulate more wealth, research energy now focuses on understanding how shared prosperity can be created and sustained, how communities can become more resilient and adaptive, how individual well-being can be enhanced through contribution to collective flourishing rather than competition for limited resources. But the most important developments can't be captured in research papers or financial reports. They exist in the quality of relationships, in the depth of connections between people who might never have met without the bridges that Amira's wisdom helped John learn to build. Family dinners now include conversations in 4 different languages, planning sessions for projects on 3 different continents, stories that span generations and cultures and continents, but somehow all contribute to a single, complex, beautiful narrative about human beings learning to live together with curiosity and respect rather than fear and suspicion. Yasmin, now in her mid-40s and studying for her nursing degree through a foundation-funded program, represents the kind of transformation that happens when people have access to opportunities that match their capabilities rather than being limited by circumstances beyond their control. Her insights into healthcare challenges come from lived experience navigating systems as a non-native English speaker, a single mother, a refugee building a new life in an unfamiliar country. Her contributions to foundation policy initiatives carry weight not because of academic credentials, but because she understands from the inside what it means when healthcare, education, and housing policies are designed by people who have never experienced the challenges those policies are meant to address. The evening fog that rolls in from the Pacific Ocean no longer signals the end of John's day, but the beginning of the family time he looks forward to most: homework sessions where he learns about subjects that didn't exist when he was in school, dinner conversations that require translation between languages and generations, planning sessions for weekend projects that might involve teaching origami to homeless veterans, preparing community garden beds for spring planting, or organizing neighborhood meetings to address local concerns through resident-led collaborative problem-solving. These domestic moments, unremarkable individually but profound in their cumulative impact, represent the true measure of John's transformation. Not the foundation programs that receive media attention, not the research initiatives that influence policy decisions, not the business innovations that demonstrate the profitability of stakeholder-centered approaches, but the daily choice to prioritize presence over productivity, relationships over returns, community engagement over individual achievement. 10 years after Amira first appeared with her basket of wilted flowers, John celebrates his 70th birthday with a party that reflects everything he has learned about wealth and wisdom. The guest list includes Nobel Prize winners and neighborhood children, refugees who have become American citizens, and Silicon Valley executives who have become community volunteers, climate scientists and elementary school teachers, venture capitalists and social workers. People who measure success in billion-dollar valuations, and people who measure it in children's laughter and elderly people's comfort and communities' resilience in the face of challenges that require collective response. The party itself demonstrates principles that the foundation has helped develop: food prepared by refugee-owned catering businesses that now serve corporate events throughout the Bay Area, music provided by young people from the community supported by foundation-funded arts programs, decorations created in workshops where children and adults collaborated on designs that represent cultures and dreams and hopes from around the world. Instead of hiring event planners who would orchestrate entertainment for passive consumption, the celebration becomes an expression of community creativity, with guests contributing rather than just attending, participating rather than just observing. As the evening progresses and John watches Amira, now a poised young woman who has somehow maintained all the wisdom of her 8-year-old self, while developing the communication skills and cultural knowledge to translate that wisdom into contexts ranging from school board meetings to international development conferences, he realizes that the most important gift she brought him wasn't the specific insights about danger she had overheard, wasn't the flowers she picked from public gardens, wasn't even the companionship that helped heal his isolation. The gift was the invitation to remember that human beings are designed for connection, collaboration, and collective care rather than competition, accumulation, and individual achievement. That invitation has transformed not just John's life, but the lives of everyone who has been touched by the ripple effects of one small girl choosing to approach a stranger's fortress with flowers and concern rather than fear and avoidance. The foundation they built together continues to grow and evolve, but its core mission remains the same: creating spaces where voices of all ages and backgrounds can be heard, where wisdom from lived experience can inform decision-making, where resources can flow toward community-defined needs rather than expert-designed programs. The financial reports that arrive on John's phone each morning continue to show impressive numbers: investment portfolios that have weathered multiple market cycles, cryptocurrency holdings that have adapted to regulatory changes and technological innovations, real estate values that reflect both market trends and community improvements. But John barely glances at these numbers now, much more interested in the text messages from Emma about her graduate research findings, from Amira about the peer mediation program she's helping develop at her high school, from Yasmin about the community health initiatives she's implementing through her work at the neighborhood clinic, from foundation staff about program outcomes that can't be measured in dollars, but represent improvements in quality of life for individuals and communities. The most profound transformation of all might be in John's understanding of time. Where he once experienced days as sequences of meetings and deadlines designed to maximize productivity and profitability, he now experiences time as opportunities for presence and connection, moments when he can listen rather than speak, learn rather than teach, contribute rather than control. The urgency that once drove his business decisions has been replaced by patience that comes from understanding that meaningful change happens through relationships built over years, trust developed through consistency, wisdom accumulated through paying attention to what works and what doesn't in pursuit of goals larger than individual success. But tonight, as the birthday party winds down and guests begin to leave with plans to continue projects they discussed during the evening, as Emma helps Amira organize leftover food to distribute to homeless people who gather in the park a few blocks away, as Yasmin coordinates with other parents about graduation celebration plans for the high school class that includes children from a dozen different countries, John realizes that this story doesn't have an ending, because transformation doesn't stop. Communities don't reach final destinations. Relationships don't achieve permanent resolution. What they have created together, this unlikely family, this innovative foundation, this network of connections that spans continents and cultures, represents not a conclusion, but a beginning, not a final solution, but an ongoing commitment to approach each day with curiosity rather than certainty, with openness rather than defensiveness, with hope rather than fear about what becomes possible when people choose to see each other as collaborators rather than competitors in the complex, beautiful, difficult, rewarding work of building a world where everyone has access to the resources and respect necessary for flourishing. And you, listening to this story wherever you are in your own journey, through questions about meaning and money, about individual success and collective well-being, about the legacy you want to leave and the kind of world you want to help create. You are part of this continuing story too. Every choice you make about how to spend your time, attention, and resources contributes to the kind of community and culture that will be inherited by the children in your life and around the world, the young people who are watching to see whether the adults in their world choose competition over cooperation, accumulation over distribution, power over service. The invitation that Amira brought to John's doorstep with her wilted flowers is available to all of us. Will you have the courage to open your door when unexpected messengers arrive? Will you choose to listen to voices that might challenge your assumptions about what's possible, what's necessary, what's worthwhile? Will you use whatever resources and influence you have in service of bridge building rather than fortress construction, community strengthening rather than individual elevation, long-term flourishing rather than short-term advantage? If this story has touched something deep in your heart, if it's reminded you of your own capacity for transformation and connection, please leave a like and share it with someone who might need to hear about the power of small voices and open doors. Subscribe to hear more stories about the miracles that happen when we choose love over fear, community over isolation, and the wealth of human connection over the poverty of spiritual emptiness. And remember, somewhere in your own neighborhood, someone small might be waiting with flowers and wisdom, ready to remind you that it's never too late to let your heart bloom again.